Hello, everyone, and welcome to creating new student journeys that support well-being, employability, and innovation. The latest in a series of roundtable discussions held in partnership between Times Higher Education and Salesforce.org. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'm chairing today's discussion. Please note that while we do not have an audience for this event, a video recording and a summary article of it will both be published on the THE website in due course. So I'd like to begin by noting that as student journeys become increasingly diverse and multifaceted, more work is now being required of universities in order to both deliver and future-proof student success. So to begin, I'd like to ask the panel, what actions are required to improve student employability and student outcomes? Because these are two increasingly cited key metrics when students are making the decisions about where to study and what they study too. Santosh, would you like to maybe sort of start us off? You could tell us a little bit about how Salesforce are working with its university partners and how your role in digital transformation help complements this.
Sure. Thanks, Alistair. I'll introduce myself briefly too before I discuss the specific questions. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Santosh Carvalho. I'm the digital transformation lead for Salesforce in Europe. My role involves working with our most strategic organizations on their digital transformation opportunities. And tactically, that involves me working alongside them to help them create a strategy for what they should be doing. It also involves helping them create an investment case or a business case that they need to get in front of a board to get the requisite funding. So really about articulating why the transformation is important, why now, what's the risk of standing still. And then lastly, working alongside a cross-functional group at Salesforce to really help put a plan in place to deliver the strategy, to deliver the vision. So pleasure to be talking to you all virtually. In answer to Alistair's question, so in terms of employability and student outcomes, what we're seeing is probably two tracks. So in my role, I've got the pleasure of talking to a number of different higher education institutions, and we're seeing two strategies. One of them I'll call skim milk, and the other one I'll call full fat milk, or the full approach. The skim approach is quite simply everyone, so the thing in common between both approaches is everyone recognizes there's got to be an improved emphasis on student outcomes. So given the level of investment that students are making, increasingly, this is the second largest debt for an individual apart from purchasing a home. So that's got to generate an outcome that's worthwhile for that individual. So everyone recognizes that. On the skim side of things, employability in particular, but also student success, so everything around their skills, both in curricular and extracurricular terms, that is treated as something on the side. That is treated as a separate program. It's generally not integrated into academia. There's generally a separate department that sits at arm's length from academia. And there is what I broadly say is lip service. There is conversations that, yes, we should do something about employability. And look, here is our department that does something about it. Maybe that's probably the harshest extreme in the skim category. Another group that have kind of taken a small leap is they start to integrate into the academic programs emphasis on employability. So every single course, so let's take the example of a classic profession for undergraduate course, law. Every single course on law, be it criminal law or contract law, will have an emphasis on how that applies in practice. What are the things that those individuals need to start thinking about as practitioners, not just the academic questions? That's on the skim side. On the more strategic side, what we're seeing, and this is where innovation and transformation starts to come to the fore, is some organizations are saying, the conceptual framework we need to give students, we need to give them the ability, much like you and I have, in terms of navigating to a destination. So you and I, if we're in a city that we don't know very well, or even sometimes that we know pretty well, we want to get to a destination, we put in where we want to go. So we go on Google Maps or we go on City Mapper, and we say, I want to get to this location. And then based on where we are, based on what we prefer, the fastest route, the most scenic, we're told how to get there. Now, these organizations that we're working with that are really pushing the boundary are starting to say, what is that equivalent that we give to students all in one place? Such that they say, my ambition is to work in public policy for government, or my ambition is actually to go on and do some further research, or whatever that is. And the recommendations or the determination of the path that that student takes, not just in terms of the courses they pick. I think that part is well covered by organizations already through careers counselors, etc. It's about the intermediary, quote unquote, softer, but increasingly important skills they need to do. So to warn them and say, people like you have gone on this journey before, typically have 2 internships after their first year. Have you started to think about that? It will start to pick up data about the interactions that they're having with the university or with the institution. So it'll start to look at things like number of attendances to a library. How often have they engaged with materials in any online quizzes? And start to trigger early warning systems and actually ask their personal tutor perhaps to check in if they've missed several classes. So starting to conceptualize the journey as we as individuals trying to get to an endpoint, and then getting to another level of maturity and saying, how can we make that bespoke? That's what we're seeing as probably the next phase of transformation in these organizations around student outcomes and employability.
Great, thank you, Santos. It's really helpful to have that overview just to sort of frame the discussion. Michelle, how is this being approached at your own institution? Do you mind, sorry, just giving us your job title and where you are, because we haven't got the chat box today.
Yeah, of course. I'm Michelle Nolan. I'm Director of Academic Programmes and Student Engagement at the University of Sheffield. I have responsibility in my portfolio for the Careers Service, our Department of Lifelong Learning, Quality Assurance, the Digital Learning team. So quite a few teams and services that obviously engage regularly in terms of student employability and that outcome side of things. A lot of what Santos has said resonates with what we're doing. So to give some quick examples, for some years now, we've had Sheffield graduate attributes. So very much trying to articulate the identity and a common place for what a Sheffield graduate is. They've recently been updated. There's 12 of those, very much focusing on my learning, my impact, and myself. We've then gone beyond that. We're very keen that careers isn't what Santos described as something at the end in a separate service. So the reason that careers sits with me and not in a student service department is very much about it being there at the beginning of the process. So when we are designing our programs, when we are thinking about student outcomes, but it starts at the very beginning. I think too often we ask students to think about what they've done in terms of their personal development. We don't ask them to think about where they are on that journey, on the Google Maps, tracking the steps. We've recently introduced something called My Skills, which basically is an online platform against which students then can track where they are against those graduate attributes. It was designed with students and across services, so it's very much designed in a way that students like to interact. So they go in, they get to score themselves about where they feel they are in terms of those elements. They get to access resources and courses and support, and they can reflect as they go through their kind of development journey. We are in the process now of embedding that. So it's been piloted in departments, but we're embedding it across all programs. So the idea is that students have it as a personal resource and a personal reflective program, but also that academics are engaged and supporting that journey as well. So I'm not quite sure, we're not quite full fat, but I'd like to think we're moving slightly beyond semi-skimmed. I think it's a real challenge, this, because I think lots of students know where they want to be. Lots of students, when picking a university, think they know where they want to be. I think our duty is not necessarily to turn them out into a job and to end up in a destination at the end of the Google map, but for them to learn about themselves and to create that kind of need in them to develop themselves and to think about their development as an ongoing thing. Because actually, this isn't 1990s, it's not all shoulder pads and whoever earns the most and, a drift to London. It's about them making the best decisions for themselves and the best contributions they can, whether that's to society or industry or elsewhere. So yes, I think we're definitely doing the similar things that Santos described, and really making that shift to make employability part of our focus.
Brilliant, thanks, Michelle. Oh, sorry, no, go on.
I was going to make one very, very last comment. We talk about student outcomes. I think we need to be really careful, particularly with the agenda at the moment, because student outcomes can be very narrowly looked at in terms of jobs and salaries. And I just think it is so much more than that in terms of our duty to our students.
If I can, sorry, Tara, I'll come to you in a moment, but Michelle, can I just ask you to expand on that last point slightly in terms of what are perhaps some of the outcomes that universities need to be mindful of and need to be nurturing that can get lost in the rush to, make sure people are going into the jobs they want or the careers they want, or you're catering to what they tell you when they turn up on day one?
So I think we've got to start talking about life after university and people's careers and so on and so forth, and not focusing too much on getting a job being the end. You get a degree and you get a job. Actually, it's about the journey. It's about helping them develop those skills that will allow them to recognise, to change tack. And lots of students make the wrong choices, or they decide they want to do something completely different. So it's really drilling down into what are the things they will need to be able to deliver. Does that answer your question? Sorry, Alice.
Yeah, no, it does. No, it's fine. I think it's something that comes up a lot when we have these type of discussions, is that it's balancing employability is tricky because it's such a high priority for students going in that universities feel they have a duty of care to try and get students the job that they want. But as you say, it's a bit more nuanced than that, in terms of, say that you get somebody the job that they've set out to get, and then they change their mind, or it's not for them, or they have to change career for whatever reason. If the entire progression that you've offered over those 3 years or 4 years is to get that job, then you've essentially got no plan B, and you perhaps haven't taught the additional skills that somebody needs to pivot to something else, or to succeed and continue to work and get the progression that they want. Tara, sorry, I saw you had your hand up earlier. I know that you're provost at London South Bank University. I know you said you're in week 3 of your job there, but London South Bank has got a really strong reputation for engaging with older learners and different types of learners and improving access. So when we talk about employability and outcomes, is this something that is shifting in terms of what LSBU is offering people, or is it a case of promoting what you've had success doing already and trying to make more people aware of it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very much the latter. In my week 3, I can say it is the latter, and definitely at London South Bank. What I wanted to say was building on what Michelle and Santosh were saying, and particularly the analogy he used of skimmed versus full-fat milk. My experience of different institution has been where the academic discipline is grounded more in kind of professional side. Law was a good example that you gave. And there is academic engagement and support and know-how on employability side, then innovative things happen in the classroom, in the tutorial. The issue why many universities have a separate employability service is to offer that consistency across the discipline so that all students have access to some advice and some support. And actually the education of many of our academic colleagues in areas and disciplines, when this is not kind of embedded and they feel that they are here to teach and they are here to research and all these other things as the responsibility of this other department. And I think there is a lot we can do with our academic colleagues to embed it so they feel as comfortable with it as many other disciplines within the university.
And what challenges persist for you when you're trying to implement this?
Well, it is around awareness, how they can bring in different areas that will strengthen the students' future careers into the classroom. So one of the things, not in my current institution, but in a couple of other institutions I've worked, is to actually bring in live projects from business, from industry, to the classroom and give the students an opportunity to engage with the world of work in the area they are interested within the classroom. And the lecturers will become very much part of that project they are all working on. So it's not so much about necessarily sending them internship, work-based learning. It's thinking of different ways that employability can be brought in to where the students do most of their learning.
Does that approach have advantages for the lecturers who are overseeing those projects and integrating them too?
Absolutely, absolutely. It certainly does, you know. So a good example is in a university that I used to work with, there used to be a call for live projects to various industry and businesses, and they will come and actually pitch their ideas in the classroom to the students. And then the students will work in groups of 2, 3 on different projects and then present it back. But their awareness of what the industry needs, what the business needs, and the practical experiences all kind of helped with the lecturer in the course. So, you know, that can be quite an effective model. That's in my experience anyway.
Great, thank you very much. Pascal, let's come to you next, if I may. You're only a non-UK representative, but I hope that's all right. You're joining us from Lausanne in Switzerland today, so thank you very much for joining us. And is the outlook around employability and student outcomes being placed under greater scrutiny in your institution and in Switzerland as well?
I think definitely. I mean, my day-to-day activities are in continuing education, so I have probably a slightly different angle on things. But I would say, and as Tara said, I think link to industry and professional association is absolutely key. I think otherwise there is always a risk of developing programs in a way in a vacuum without really knowing what are the needs. So there are different ways to involve them. Tara described a few. We also tend to work with them when we design a course, kind of involving some people from the industry, maybe in a scientific board or something like this. So we know that we have their input when we develop a program. I would say in terms of employability, I think that something that we look at very closely right now are the questions of transferable skills. That is, you might study in a particular discipline, but really paying attention to the development of skills that you can transfer to other activities also. So you don't think in terms of a silo. And we talk about transferable skills, but also, if you want, foundational skills, which are those skills that can be really of value in different fields and give you maybe some more flexibility and agility in your professional life. Now, when it comes to what we do in continuing education, we are really now thinking more and more along the lines of individualized learning path, really to really respond to the needs of the learners. And when you speak about well-being, these are things that you can also do in terms of the format of the courses to enable really different people to access education, which could not maybe in the very traditional of face-to-face or on campus. I would also add one last thing, is that sometimes you can have initiatives also at the level of the type of program that you offer. And we have an example here of Lausanne, a partnership between 3 institutions, which created E4S, which is for Enterprise for Society. And this week we launched a new program in sustainable management and technology. That's very much the idea also, that at level of the institution to kind of see what are the trends, where things are going, and to offer new programs that prepare students for this world.
So for the partnerships with the other institutions that you formed, was that where did the idea for that come from? Was it meeting a need for students to create something that you think would be more sustainable for lifelong learning and continuing education?
I think it was really the fact that we have three. I mean, we have three universities. Kind of. I mean, basically one business school, one engineering school, and one kind of more general type of university. And I think very much there was these questions: how can you respond to, I mean, the needs in terms of sustainability, the really rapid technology development, and the need for having the next generation of managers. And I think quite naturally, the idea came that the three institutions should come together, because it was probably the only way to truly respond to those needs. Like an engineering school on its own can do some things, a business school also, but probably they can work better being together to address those kind of, also I would say, maybe it's not a very good word, but multidisciplinary needs or fields. Yeah.
Does it make it easier to teach transferable skills when you've got that level of collaboration? Is it easier for the staff and the students to see how, when you've got different parties working together in that way, the commonality between what's needed for, you know, a successful business student, a successful engineering student, or a successful academic student, there will be the same skills that overlap in some areas, and does it make it easier to teach them, or does it underline their importance, or perhaps both?
I think when you think about transferable skills, this is really also something that has to do with pedagogy, and really defining precisely the sort of skills you want to develop, and then to develop the right pedagogical scenarios to make sure those are developed. And so it requires really a lot of work in terms of learning outcomes, and sometimes those skills are better developed, I would say, in a multidisciplinary field. When you think about projects, for example, projects that will involve technology, sustainable development, and economics, these sort of things, I think they go well together. But I think it can help prepare managers who can really be at ease in a very complex and rapidly changing environment. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. It's fine. It was quite a long question, so it was fine. Thanks for our time. Alice, can we come to you next, please? Thank you for joining us. I'm right in saying that you're head of student services at Plymouth University in the UK. What are the changing needs, or perhaps the changing nature of engagement that you've had with students when they talk about how employability and their learning outcomes are important to them?
I'm not sure I can give you a full answer to that. I mean, I don't directly I have responsibility for careers and employability at Plymouth, so I wouldn't want to sort of pluck it out of what I think they're saying and mislead anyone. But I would just say, on the back of the previous discussion, and picking up Michelle's point, I think about what's measured isn't actually an outcome for a student or a graduate. There's a lot more that happens that's transformational when they're at university. We're measured on one or two parts of that as to where they are after. And as a university in the southwest of England, where quite a third of our students commute and they live in the region, and quite a few of them will stay here after, the southwest of England, with the exception of Bristol, to some extent Exeter, and then to a lesser extent Plymouth, isn't known for having big employers with high level sort of graduate jobs. So either those graduates need to go and leave the region, and some want to, but some don't want to do that. But I do think if we're to sort of to play the game about employability and graduate outcomes, which are important, you know, students spend a lot of money on their education ultimately, and it's a huge decision to make to come to study. I think having those connections with industry are really important, and that can be a challenge if you're in a region like us where some of those industry partners are slightly further afield. Actually, the pandemic has made those connections easier, because there's more obviously remote working and ability to engage from wherever you are in the world. So hopefully we can capitalize on some of that, but it is a challenge. And I think, you know, fair enough, if someone wants to come and study locally and then get a job in the region as well because they love living here and they want to stay with their family or friends, great. But I know that doesn't equate to league table performance.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And as far as the way in which learning communities are changing as a result to sort of people shifting online and adopting blended learning for the long term, has that had an impact, do you think, in terms of how people think about employability and their career? In terms of, are they learning slightly different ways? Is it encouraging entrepreneurship, or is it encouraging local hubs of innovation?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll see what other people think. I don't know if it's a little bit early to tell. I think those people that are in employment will have noticed quite the transformation, but recent graduates, I think the labour market will be tough to enter. There's quite a degree of competition, and those that are sort of embarking on it now, you know, either in the first or latter years of their degree, I guess we will see what sticks. You know, will the government really let London empty of people because it's cheaper to live outside? No, I think there'll be incentives so that obviously employers stay and carry on paying rent in the city. So I don't know. I mean, I'm a few steps removed, so I'll let others comment.
That's fine, no problem. As someone who lives in London, I've certainly noticed a significant drop in living costs here in the past 18 months. So we shall see how it goes. Sarah, you're joining us from the Open University, where you're Deputy Director of Careers and Employability Services. I saw you nodding in agreement with a couple of Alice's points. How are we seeing how the shift's affecting the Open University? Because obviously you have a diverse cohort. There's it's always championed things like a flexible curricula and online learning. With the increased scrutiny that employability is under now, is it like Alex says, is it too early to spot any real shifts, or are you seeing some changes in attitudes from students already?
I suppose what we've been advised by our students, as you quite rightfully described them as incredibly diverse, is that it's leveled the playing field for quite a lot of them, because recruitment has moved online, and many opportunities, including insight days, work experience opportunities, virtual internships, are much more accessible for those with a disability, or some mental health challenges, etc. So many of our students have fed back to us that they do feel that they're more of an equal partner now, where they may not have been able, physically, emotionally, etc., have felt considered before in the sort of recruitment or employability game. So certainly that's one thing that we have noticed, and I think the pandemic has made employers much more aware of that digital space and opportunity for creating more opportunities, most definitely. And in terms of the scrutiny, I think where people have possibly commented, sorry, I was slightly late in a previous meeting, around the graduate outcomes piece, and where much of the sector feels that it's not really measuring the right things. In terms of our diverse cohort, I think it has, and the funding for the Office for Students, etc., around access, participation, success plans, and the four nation governments. As a four nation university, we see that replicated in sort of Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland as well, that it has kind of really pushed us as an institution to focus on the outcomes of those who are most disadvantaged. And actually we're highly supported within the university to do that. That's not to say that we'll forget about those we would classify as career developers, and we segregate them now in readiness. So, where are they in their career journey? And then we try and tailor our services more effectively to them. What do they need? And we ask the students that, where are they in that journey, and who needs us the most? That's not to say that we don't deliver services to the developers, but we maybe target a lot more of our one-to-one activity exclusively at those whose outcomes are more disadvantaged. Okay. So that's something we've been working on.
It sounds like you have it's a bit easier for you to analyse the needs of the cohort, and it sounds like it strengthens some feedback loops with them as well.
Yep.
Santosh, we come to you next. I mean, I'm sure you've got something to add, but I just wanted to ask an extra question about how have you seen universities balancing the positive and negatives of this? I mean, as Sarah's saying, there are rooms for greater insights and greater analyses of what students need, and the benefits have been things like improving access and improving equality. However, there is these sort of lingering challenges about, are people using the wrong metrics when they start to look at student employability? I mean, are these conversations you're having with university partners that Salesforce is working with?
Yeah, absolutely, we are. And I just actually wanted to go back just to round off the conversation on, what is being measured and are we measuring the right things? Interestingly, we ran a survey called the Connected Student Report. And if you don't have access to it, we can certainly share it. And 1 out of 2 students, or 49% of students said, and this is students, the major determinant for them choosing to go to university was career prospects, albeit long-term. They didn't say short-term. And I often sense in talking to institutions, there is perhaps an institutional mindset which stays, and I completely understand why. There are indeed several important outcomes of student life that are not measured either through some of the frameworks the government mandates, or even some of the things that newspapers rank universities on. But interestingly, that perspective is not shared by students, certainly at the outset of their studying life. It may be a reflection of age, at the age of 18, or 19 or 20, if you're predominantly undergraduates and that's your first learning experience, it tends to be reasonably goal-oriented for a lot of individuals. So it's useful reflecting on the perspective we bring in trying to answer that question. I think from an institutional perspective, it makes complete sense why we want to measure other value that we're adding to the student in terms of things that will not just be for the first job, it'll be for the duration of their lifetime. But for the students, certainly a really big lens, particularly at early career, sort of early learning experience is important to pick up in that space, is employment. The second question that you asked me, Lawrence, I think is probably the more challenging one that we're seeing at the moment. And that's about how to kind of and I think it ties into one of the questions you had earlier about blended learning. What we're seeing is a double-edged sword at the moment. So some universities were extremely successful in terms of crisis response to switch to a blended learning model where they were it was a purely physical model at the beginning. So they were extremely successful in making that switch in terms of a crisis response. Now there's an identity question for some universities or for some institutions. Are we committed in terms of a strategy of being blended learning going forward? If so, that changes a lot of the interactions in terms of employability, in terms of how we're measuring outcomes, in terms of how we get students engaged with each other, with partners across. It changes that entire model. Whether institutions are ready and willing and able to do that is a different question. There's been others that have said, our identity is our identity. We're not going to change significantly. I was a student for a while. I took some time off work to go into full-time study, and I found I was with a Russell Group University, and they actually were forced to transition in the middle of the pandemic to that. And interestingly, for one of the most traditional universities, they've turned around and said, we see value in this blended learning model for the student. There's a pedagogical benefit in teaching in this way, because I think Pascal made the point, we're finding that different individuals learn in different ways. So there's significant improvement in student outcomes that we measured. The trade-off was they saw a drop-off in student well-being. They saw a disconnection from peers. They saw a disconnection from forming communities that will just organically happen by physical interaction. So I think the challenge going forward is, how do you balance possibly improved learning outcomes in a lot of institutions, and how do you balance that against potentially losing a sense of community that physical interaction gave? And I think the onus is on those moving to that model to really think about the latter and think of strategies for closing that gap.
Great, thank you, Santosh. Michelle, you had your hand raised. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, it was really in response because we see that same thing. You know, students start at university and they often have quite a fixed idea, or they're attracted to a university because of the employability offer or where they want to be at the end. I think some of that's consequential of how schools operate as well at the moment. I've got a 14-year-old daughter who's about to have her first career interview, and I think there is something about, you know, the world has changed. People don't do a degree, graduate, go into a job set for life. And I think our student expectations are changing. So, you know, I talk to students where we are, and they are, you know, they are going through a transformational journey. That's what universities are. They're not just about creating civil engineers or historians. They're about allowing those individuals to be the best they can be, and to learn and to acquire skills. And I think it would be remiss for us not to support them on that journey. In terms of blended learning as well, I think there's a risk that as academics and as academic institutions, we talk about blended learning as something we deliver. You know, it's a bit online or a bit in a classroom or a bit of, and actually missing that it's why does the student want that? So I was talking to a student yesterday who was saying for her, blended learning is a choice whether to go to a lecture or whether to see something pre-recorded. It's a choice about how they learn. It's a choice about how they engage with their learning communities. And I don't think we think enough about that, about the person behind it, and all that fits in with their reflection of themselves. You know, so who are they? How do they like to learn? How do they like to process? How do they like to interact? And we really need to we need to keep an eye on that in terms of their journey through. In relation to that, Tara mentioned earlier about the role of academic colleagues. I think it's very easy to think, well, academics can do a bit of the career stuff or a bit of the employability stuff, and I think it's not. If somebody is, I'll go back to a civil engineer, then they often know what it's like to be a civil engineer or an architect. If you're a historian and your students are going into all sorts of jobs, how do you ask a tutor, a personal tutor, to prepare that person for known employment or a particular type of employment? But I think this is where the skills agenda comes in, because what academics can do beautifully is spend time with students to reflect on their learning, whatever that learning is. And I think we've got to start to really think about where's the student, not just what are we teaching them for what purpose at the end. Sorry, that was a very long response to something Santosh said.
No, it's fine. No, I prefer that because it means I can think of other questions to ask on the back of them. And one of the questions I did want to bring up was one of the points we have for discussion today, which is in what ways can universities support well, it's originally lifelong learning, but really any learning in a way that gives staff and students the ability to innovate. So I mean, I think Michelle, I thought you made some interesting points there about being aware of how students see themselves and the idea that they have what is the best way that they find to learn. Is it in person, is it online? As universities start to perhaps experiment or broaden out more in terms of the peer learning that they can promote that way, or just different types of learning communities, and also the breaking down the international barriers by using digital education to allow people to cross international borders and work with international peers or international companies, even maybe without having previous restrictions in place. Is it a case of really examining pedagogy in a different way now and thinking, okay, we have to give our academics enough freedom to innovate and try new things to see what works, and with the understanding that perhaps it will work for some disciplines better than others? So there might be subjects with very sort of stringent PSRB tests and things like that still have to be assessed and taught in a certain way, but within that there can be more variation in terms of letting staff and student contribute more and give you more feedback that helps you build on a course design in future.
Shall I come back?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Certainly what we're trying to do at Sheffield is the way a lot of universities operate in a modularised and semesterised world. We've gone into chunks of learning, and often an academic links with a particular chunk of learning. So it's my module, not our programme. So for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been focusing really strongly on this idea of program level, because I think you can experiment with a program much more effectively and much more impact than you can by asking lots of individual academics to think about employability or sustainability or inclusivity at that kind of level. And I think when you start to think about programs and you think about, you know, the whole of the student experience and all the things that wrap around that in terms of the additional support, then I think you start to be able to do some really interesting and innovative things, and you start to be able to take those risks. So that would be, you know, how I think we can do a lot more in terms of design. The other obvious one is involving students in every part of that kind of co-development journey.
Thanks very much. Alice, I thought I saw you nodding to a couple of points that Michelle made there, which is normally sort of the kiss of death on Zoom, because it means I ask that person to add something next. But is that kind of resonating with the program that you provide for student services?
Oh, I don't know. Like I say, we're sort of a few steps away, but I was particularly just at the end, you know, I don't know what other people think about what the best way is of engaging students in our planning for this, but that feels like absolutely the, I don't know, the holy grail, but it's fairly up there in terms of what's going to turn the ship. And of course, with cohorts changing every year, you've got to be quite fleet of foot about it and quite effective in whatever your engagement is. I don't know how effective we are at that in Plymouth. That's not to say we are or we aren't, but I don't know what other people think, really.
Okay, Pascal, can I come to you next on that point, just because you spoke a bit earlier about interdisciplinary and teaching different types of skills. How have the feedback loops changed with students for you over the past 18 months?
But I liked what Santosh said before when he talked a bit about this identity crisis and how to sort of try to capitalize on what we've been through, and I would say that I think now is a time where we have to make important strategic decisions in terms of the sort of institution we want to be and the sort of the type of program we want to offer. I mean, do we really emphasize face-to-face teaching, or do we wanna develop mainly online courses or blended? In terms of talking about the feedback loop, I would say that it's probably, for me, it's probably too early to say, in the sense that we could see at the beginning of the crisis, everybody was very happy with discovering online teaching, but within a context which was emergency remote teaching, which was something quite specific. No, a year later, we can see here that everybody is so happy to come back to the campus. Everybody wanted to speak only about face-to-face, so it's kind of going the other way. And I imagine that at some point we're gonna go back slowly somewhere kind of in the middle with more blended solutions. But once again, I think there are some important strategic decisions to be made, and that probably we didn't have the time or didn't to really do this thinking, because everything is changing like almost every week these days.
Mm-hmm. And then in that case, does the integration with industry help with the planning? Because if you are able to get feedback from that community as well, they are essentially at the front lines of, you know, the type of work that needs doing, the type of jobs that they need filled, and the type of skills that graduates and other employees typically lack that are needing to be taught better.
I think it's something that is absolutely key. Unfortunately, universities don't do that very well, I would say, naturally. So we really have to make efforts on that side. A few examples of things that can be interesting is when really you work also with the professional associations. For example, for a while we've been training like lawyers in different specialties, and with a curriculum which is really jointly designed. This is something that we do. There is also a rise in programs that are really tailor-made for companies because they really have specific needs, and you work with them to address those needs. But I think we still have to invest a lot in that field. Like in continuing education, we are trying to invest in having people who can really work at the interface between like one of the school and industry. So people who know what knowledge we have within the school, but can also really see what are the needs, and then to do bridges between theory and practice. This is one way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Tara, I'd like to come to you next just to ask a bit more about London South Bank. LSB actually won a THE award 3 or 4 years ago, I think now, for an initiative that helped people get back into the workplace after they had either gone back to education or had lost their job for whatever reason. To Michelle's earlier point about modular learning enabling a lot of innovation in terms of the teaching and learning space, is that something you think where perhaps for your institution or maybe other people on the panel could answer this, whether you will see perhaps almost these kind of boot camp type structures that are a shorter course that have a very specific aim to them, and they are perhaps either integrated into the main degree programs, or they're something that are offered completely separately in order to address the needs of employers or the needs of students regarding employability?
Thank you. As Michelle was talking, I was just reflecting on, what she was talking when she was referring to program level. And I'm not that familiar with exactly what has happened in LSBU historically, but that makes perfect sense to me rather than single unit level at program level, because you can have quite innovative intervention at that level, whether it is via boot camps or whether it is via different type of engagement with employers. But you can see for different disciplines, how if you bring things together at program level, you can have a really good kind of level playing field in terms of skills. So I am very much supportive of that. And it's something that, if nothing else, after this meeting, I'm going to find out how we approach it. And if we don't, can we implement it? So that is something that I can see it will work across all disciplines in an intensive way at program level. So thank you for that, Michelle.
Added more work to you and your colleagues' plate. Santosh, I'd like to come to you next just to ask a related question about this, which is to do with the need for universities to integrate their systems in a slightly different way, perhaps. A lot of the challenges that are being described by the panelists here today are to do with silos and to do with breaking out of old ways of working, and about how you can encourage innovation in certain parts of the university, but it's harder to do it in others. Is there a way to integrate systems that at least helps you break down silos so that people become more aware of the innovative strategies that work for staff and students?
Yeah, so I wish I had a whiteboard. I'd sketch a diagram which would try and explain, and very topical, a whiteboard in front of universities. There's two things. So first thing to mention is, please have empathy for your colleagues in IT. And the reason I say that is, historically, the way universities, or actually not just university, every industry, the way they invested in technology was by functional department. So what they said was, I've got a marketing or a recruiting and admissions need. Recruiting and admissions as a department went and picked up a system for doing that. Student services, they did likewise. Now, those two systems may not be interoperable. They may not have anything in common. And then IT has to come and stitch together the data in such a way that, okay, on day one, student, once they've accepted their offer, all of that, we hope, magically translates into them being inducted and online. The reality is it doesn't happen that simply. The legacy of that is, you can imagine, now I'm going to try and get you to imagine something. Imagine a pyramid. Most organizations that we're working with, they've integrated their IT in a way that they're spending, let's say, in a year, their maximum spend is £100 or €100 on IT. So that's what they're spending. That's the pyramid. Now they're spending 70 to 80 on just keeping the lights on, in making sure the integration between that system that I said, for example, recruiting and admissions, talking to student services, different microcosms of student services, employability, student welfare, pastoral support, sporting activity, all of that needs to be stitched together. So the £70 out of the 100 is just on keeping the lights out. Another 10 is on integration. And maybe if you're lucky, another 10 is going to be on innovation. And what then happens is you'll have people, very creative people in different areas of the institution going, we need to create amazing journeys for our students that are personalized. IT colleagues, can you help? And they can't, not because they're not skilled, not because they don't want to, is because they've only got that much left in being able to make those changes because of historically how IT has been invested in. Our approach is move to a platform-centric model, right? A platform-centric model says invert that pyramid, whereby you're investing in a single platform with little bits that you can integrate, and cloud technology allows that to happen. And I'm not just talking about Salesforce here. There are, preferably please do come to Salesforce, but if not, there are other cloud platform technologies work on the same principle, whereby you don't have to spend money on keeping the lights on. Inherently, these cloud platforms will allow integrations to happen really easily. So to go back to that model of having a student journey where everyone gets to decide the path that they want to take, change their mind after year one, and then the path magically changes with different recommendations. For that to happen, it's got to move to a platform-centric model. And now, as I invert that pyramid, the organizations that we've seen being successful in that transformation have said, obviously, they're still spending money on tech, but the size of the pyramid is smaller and it's inverted. So 70 to 80 euros now, or 60 to 70 euros or pounds, is not spent on keeping the lights on. It's on making these new changes because you don't have to worry about that. The remaining 10 euros or 10 pounds is still spent. There's always going to be some level of maintenance and integration to be done. But the key transformation that's happening technologically that we're seeing is this transition from the old-fashioned pyramid of lots of bespoke systems with lots of bespoke integrations with clunky journeys, quite frankly, to centralized platform, cloud-based, so that you can quickly iterate and change.
Great. Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not an IT specialist, but that makes a lot of sense to me. And we at Plymouth did a proof of concept for the Salesforce Advisor Link. So for the sort of student support and academic advising, and it sort of brings it all together and it gives students this success team. Okay, some of that language might be slightly, you might want to adapt it for UK institutions or European, but either way, the principles are, it's like a wraparound model of that student, create action plans, and as Santosh is saying, then I guess you can link to different platforms and you can sort of bolt on parts to it around careers or employability skills. And we haven't gone with it at the moment. Events have overtaken, and we're looking at a new student record system now, so that's going to be a massive project for Plymouth for the next few years. And I'd like to revisit Advisor Link in the future because faculty staff really liked it and support staff really liked it. So that was a real win, and actually it's brought us closer together in a way, and we're now thinking about how we can work more closely and share some of these systems, so that from my perspective, it enables staff to give more personalised, student-centric advice. They can see a 360-degree view of a student instead of all these disparate systems and don't talk to each other.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Pascal?
Yeah, I've got a question for Santosh. Is if I look at the Swiss landscape in terms of universities, I mean, the tradition is to have really IT teams internally that develop like student management systems and so on. I think in the past we used to say there is not really a solution on the market. It looks like, because I've seen that Salesforce has now a division for education, which is something I think interesting, new, but it takes a bit of culture change to say we're gonna buy something outside. The cost can be fairly high. At the beginning of the session, you said that you had published a report or something on the needs for integration. Can you say a few words about it, and maybe if it could be made available, it could be really interesting.
Sure. The report was on connected students. It was a piece of research on trends in terms of what students want. It wasn't specifically on integration. I'm sure we've got information on that we can talk about. To your point about cultural change, absolutely. It's a culture change, but not just for IT. It will be a culture change for the variety of sort of functional areas that now have to start to collaborate in the manner that Alice talked about. So historically, everyone will kind of see their department or their function as their role. And interestingly, this is kind of the transformation journey that happened in the commercial world, I'd say 5 to 8 years ago. So if you think of your classic retailer or classic automotive company, they had the same problem. They were marketing, sales, service, different departments, not talking to each other, very difficult for a customer to try and transact with them. Salesforce came in with, but other technologies too, but the intent was, how do you create a seamless journey for a consumer? But that required a culture change for them, where they said, it's not just my business anymore working in service, that I only do a good job in service. Because if I do a good job in service, I've implicitly made the next sale very easier with that same customer. That required a huge cultural mindset. We are seeing that challenge both in IT. So I think there's an IT cultural mindset that has to happen to invest in a different way. You're right, absolutely. But concomitantly, there has to be a business or the educational side that has to transform as well, to think about student journeys kind of as this horizontal, not disparate bits of vertical. So both actually have to happen culturally.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Sarah, I just wanted to come to you on that point. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left to ask about how the modular setup is changing it, the way that courses are being delivered by the Open University, and whether you think this will have any sort of long-lasting structural changes. And then Alice can come to you after that. Oh, Alice has to drop off. Sorry, it was a wave goodbye, not a wave to get my attention. But sorry, Sarah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was interested just when Michelle spoke earlier just about the program level sort of planning. The OU is very modularly based, but increasingly so program level driven. I think England, certainly Northern Ireland and Wales funding drives that. That they need to register obviously for a qualification now rather than modular level study. Although that still remains not the case in Scotland, which provides us therefore with challenges as a university to provide both. I think, yeah, always the modular level, Michelle's absolutely right. It's the same in the OU. ALs or academics get very excited about their modules, and they feel a very strong sense of identity and belonging to them. But we are trying to very much look at the qualification pathways and providing employability skills within the pathway. And we do have an employability framework across the institution, which was based on the 10 sort of Confederate of British industry skills. It's now been 4-nationed with the 4 governments in terms of their skills priorities and recovery work. And these are mapped into, currently we've got a sort of 2025 project to map employability skills into every programme by that time. And that is done on a modular level basis at the moment with all of the associate lecturers. We're trying to offer them additional contracts to map employability skills across the curriculum. But it is at a modular level, but it will also be at a sort of programme level most definitely as well. And those skills are being revisited with the 4 nations governments around, pandemic recovery to make sure obviously they're as up to date as possible. I think just where Santosh was certainly talking about the cloud activity and digital platforms, we're just in procurement of a student intervention platform, which will look at student needs, hopefully using various diagnostics at the right time in the right programme, within the student journey to break down some of those silos based on, the profile of the student, the programme that they're on, but also the needs that they have, where they live geographically, what their socio-demographic background is, but more importantly, what they tell us at the start via some diagnostics in terms of their programme needs, but also their personal needs. And then we're doing a whole test and learn with workflow as well. So tagging various things into a programme of work based on the needs they tell us in certain diagnostics, which may be of interest, I think, to others. And just around something Pascal said earlier, just about labour market information and skills, we've just developed a labour market information interactive as well for students. We had a lot of student feedback during the pandemic that they wanted more labour market information, and not only that, but they didn't know how to use it. So we've developed a labour market interactive across the 4 nations in the UK, where they can look up sectoral growth at the same time as understanding how to interpret that into decision making and planning within their career alongside their programme.
Great. Thank you very much. Plenty of innovation listed by the sound of it. That takes us up to time, unfortunately, so that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the panel. It's been really interesting to hear your insights and hear your experience. Also to Santosh and Salesforce for partnering with us to be able to do these roundtable discussions. It's really helpful. As I said, there will be an on-demand video version of this recording and also a summary article that will be published on the THE website subsequently. You'll be sent a link to that. We will also make sure to send you a link to the report that Santosh referenced earlier, so you will have it for reference there as well. If you'll bear with us, it normally takes us a couple of working days to get the video edited and get the article written, but we will be in touch post-event. So yes, thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope to be able to engage with you at future THE events.